we're still likely to see a little bit of a softening in prices. This I've taken from what RICS, Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, are telling their members, and they come out and do the valuations. So they dictate what happens to the banks' lending policies.
Yeah, they need to. I remember when I first got involved in property 16, 17 years ago, at that time, when we're trying to assess whether a deal works or doesn't work, we would do calculations based on around 6%.
Yeah.
And it was the norm at the time, and these sort of rates of 1% or less are unheard of.
Yes.
Change. But then we've been through a bubble over the last 10 years or so of exceptionally low interest rates. Whether you use mortgages or not, all this affects the market.
It does.
And those low rates have created this demand, these increases in prices.
Yeah.
So how do you think the property prices will pan out over the next year or two?
Yeah, I think residential, we're still likely to see a little bit of a softening in prices. This I've taken from what RICS, Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, are telling their members, and they come out and do the valuations. So they dictate what happens to the banks' lending policies. Therefore, that drives the market. So prices are likely to soften probably up to 5% from where it is now. The peak was August last year. We've already dropped just over 5%. I'm predicting a further up to 5% fall. With commercial, my area of speciality, that is going to keep falling for some time, on vacant properties particularly. And that's going to keep falling until interest rates fall. So until next year, prices are going to keep falling in commercial. That will then be linked with how deep a recession we might go into based upon the banking crisis. It'll also be based on what happens with interest rates and how businesses basically have their economic confidence. And I know later on today I'm sharing some stuff about businesses globally, economic confidence. And that all filters into the pricing model for commercial. Sounds complicated, but I monitor this through osmosis.
It makes logical sense.
Yes.
It's understanding that the market's not isolated to what's happening here in Birmingham, for example.
Yeah.
The global markets affect what will happen with property demand, prices, interest rates, and ultimately that impacts us in terms of investors and where we should and shouldn't be investing.
You will get micro markets, don't get me wrong. A major employer might come to a particular area and all of a sudden you'll see a spike in demand. I call it following the politics of the market. We've had budgets where they've created enterprise zones, and what you see happening all of a sudden is the commercial and residential prices in those areas boost a little bit because there's going to be inward investment, and that is going to create demand.
So where do you see the assessment then before we wrap up? What's your assessment of the opportunity over the next couple of years? Where do you think will be the biggest opportunities?
If we think about it, buying land technically is the cheapest, but when you buy some of the commercial buildings, and I can point to buildings locally which are making 7 flats and are acquired at £125,000, that's a very cheap land cost. Yes. We've already got the superstructure, we've got the foundations, we've got the roof, we've got the windows. What are we doing? Well, we're taking out what's there and we're putting some stud walls up. It's a very cheap way of creating flats, finished dwellings. The flash to bang, 56 days for the planning approval. The fastest I've had done is 9 days.
Right.
Now, I do run a planning and architectural design business, and we have a system and a methodology of getting these through that little bit faster. So 9 days is my fastest. It takes approximately 3 months to 6 months, depending on the size of the building, to create these flats. If I was a new build developer, I can't get out the ground. If I'm doing HMOs, generally speaking, it's 3 to 6 months to get my HMOs, probably a bit longer to get my license in. So it's about the same timescales, except I'm adding massive value. I mean, if I'm not creating 100 to 200% growth in the money put into the deal, I'm not interested. Now, that to me tells you a lot. I also want deals that don't suck my time because I like holidays. Yes. I like a holiday every month.
Yeah.
So it stops
Whenever
me.
older you.
Yeah, sorry.